Welcome, fellow knowledge seekers, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating, multifaceted world, South Asian religious history. You sent us an incredible collection of sources. We've got thesis excerpts, scholarly articles, academic texts, and they paint this vivid picture of, well, interwoven spiritual traditions. We're especially focusing on a unique body of hymns known as the Jeenans.
Yeah, and what's truly remarkable here, looking through these sources, is how they let us explore the confluence of so many diverse paths. We're talking Ismaili Islam, Hindu Bhakti, Tantra, Yoga, Sufism. It's a real mix.
Yeah.
So our mission today really is to uncover the core insights, understand precisely how these traditions interacted and sometimes, diverged, and pinpoint those aha moments that pop out from this incredibly rich historical context. We'll be looking at the philosophical underpinnings and the surprising ways ideas flowed and transformed, really became something new.
Okay, so let's unpack this first. What exactly are these Jeenans? Why are they such a critical lens for understanding South Asian spirituality? What makes them so, well, special?
Right. So at their heart, Jainins are religious poems. They come primarily from the Nizari Ismaili community. That's a branch of Shia Islam, particularly strong in the Indian subcontinent. Their main purpose was didactic, meaning they were designed to teach Ismaili doctrines.
Okay, so teaching tools.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the key thing, the really insightful part. They didn't just teach directly. They did so by weaving in existing Hindu symbols, narratives, themes.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, think of them less as like a static bridge and more as a really sophisticated act of cultural translation, designed to introduce these new spiritual ideas in a language and framework that was already familiar to the local mentality.
That's a powerful strategy, isn't it? Making a new message accessible by speaking the existing cultural language. So how did this tradition actually emerge historically? Where do these Jainins really come from?
Well, the sources trace the roots back surprisingly far. We're talking Fatimid Ismailis already having a significant presence in Sindh as early as 958 AD. Multan was a key center. And missionaries like this figure Al-Haytham played a crucial role in converting many local inhabitants.
Okay.
But then, after the fall of the Ismaili state of Alamut in Iran, that was 1256, the movement often had to go underground, sometimes concealing its esoteric, its hidden teachings within the broader, more sort of publicly accepted Sufi tradition.
Right, so adapting was absolutely key to their survival and spread. And as these oral teachings evolved, how did they eventually transition into, written texts? What does that whole process tell us about their nature?
Well, originally the Jeenans were almost exclusively an oral tradition, passed down through generations of singers. The earliest identified manuscript we actually have only dates to 1736.
Wow, really? That late?
Yeah. And they were written in this unique script called Kojki, known only to community members, apparently. And it actually predated the modern Devanagari script. Interestingly, Hindus in Sindh and Punjab also used Kojki for commerce, so it wasn't exclusively religious. Then, around the turn of the 20th century, you get this scholar, Mukhi Laiji Devraj, who undertook this monumental task, collating, editing, publishing hundreds of these manuscripts, first in Kojki, then later into Gujarati.
That sounds like an absolutely incredible undertaking. But what's really fascinating, and the sources mention this repeatedly, is this kind of fluidity in the texts, like they were living documents.
Yes, and this raises a really important question about authorship as we tend to understand it today. Scholars widely agree these texts weren't static. They underwent what's described as exuberant and imaginative improvisations by singers, by scribes, over time.
So not fixed at all.
Not at all. You might find a poem attributed to a famous saint, like Kabir, right? But then an almost identical version crops up, attributed to Gorakhnath or maybe Lalan Fakir in a different collection. It means the Jeenans were constantly transformed, updated, reflecting their vibrant living performance culture rather than, say, fixed singular compositions from one author.
Right.
It's also a testament to their adaptability that even the Kojki script itself eventually gave way to Perso-Arabic scripts by the early 1970s. It stopped being a living script for new compositions then.
That fluidity is such a powerful concept, and it really sets the stage for our next big question, doesn't it? Which is kind of the heart of this deep dive. How did these incredibly diverse traditions not just coexist, but actively transform each other? Let's maybe start with the fundamental questions. Ultimate reality, the divine. How did they approach that?
Okay, yeah. The sources clearly highlight distinct perspectives on Brahman, the ultimate reality in Hindu philosophy.
Yeah.
So, for example, you have Sankar's Advaita Vedanta school. It essentially says Brahman is impersonal, unqualified reality, like a vast, boundless ocean without distinct features, Qualities are only really for meditation, not inherent to Brahman itself.
Okay, impersonal.
Then, in stark contrast, you have Vaishnava teachers upholding a personal god, identifying Brahman with a deity like Vishnu, who definitely does have attributes, characteristics.
Right, very different.
And then you've got Ramanuja's qualified non-dualism, Visistadvaita. He sees the individual soul as a part, or maybe a fragment, of the ultimate, like individual drops in that ocean. We're dependent, yet we retain a separate identity, even when reunited. And for Ramanuja, salvation getting there is achieved through devotion, through bhakti.
So we've got the impersonal, the personal, and then this idea of distinct parts within the whole. Now, where do the Jainins, and particularly Islamic thought, fit into this very Hindu concept of avatars? That seems like a tricky integration.
This is where the blending gets truly, well, revolutionary, I think. So, Vaishnava Hindus believe in 10 avatars, right? Divine descents of Vishnu coming to earth in different ages. The Nizari Ismaili peers, the revered spiritual guides, they actually portrayed Sathpanth Ismailism, which means the true path of Ismailism, as a completion of this very Hindu belief. Remarkably, they presented Ali, the first Ismaili Imam, as the 10th, awaited avatar, like the ultimate manifestation.
Wow, okay, that's bold.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just them. You have figures like Syed Sultan, a Bengali Sufi, who even constructed a Muhammad avatar narrative. His goal was basically to make Islamic prophetology seem continuous with the Puranic tradition, to kind of compete with Hindu epics like the Ramayana. He used this strategy scholars call semantic stacking, essentially taking an existing concept like jinn and layering new, deeper, or Islamic meanings onto it, expanding their meaning to integrate Islamic narratives into the existing Hindu cosmological framework.
That's a powerful reinterpretation, a direct repatterning of belief structures. Did the sources suggest much friction or resistance to such a bold integration from, either Hindu or more Orthodox Islamic communities at the time?
It's interesting, the sources primarily focus on the success of this integration rather than spelling out direct friction in detail. However, you do get glimpses of internal tension through figures like Kabir. While he mentions various Vishnu avatars, Kabir often asserted they were not worthy of devotion.
Oh.
He directed devotion instead to the supreme God alone. So that highlights a fascinating tension, right? Some sought full integration, others, like Kabir, emphasized a more singular, ultimate divine focus, even within this syncretic landscape.
That focus on an ultimate, perhaps internalized divine, that also brings us to the core of many of these traditions, the inner journey. How do the genes and related texts describe this process, this spiritual transformation?
A really central concept, and it appears in Kabir's poetry and all through the Jainins, is this idea of dying before death. As Kabir puts it, he who knows how to die before the death, then he will never have to die again.
Powerful words.
Yeah. And it's not literal death, of course. It means killing the ego, smashing desires, dying to the world, while still physically living. The insight here is that a life lived in untruth, one consumed by ego and desire, is considered a kind of pseudo-life, or even form of spiritual death. True life begins with this inner transformation.
That's a profoundly challenging concept, isn't it, for personal transformation? So how does one achieve this inner death and then the subsequent awakening? What specific practices did the sources emphasize?
The practice of sumaran, or dhikr, which is basically the remembrance or recitation of God's name, is paramount, absolutely key. The Brahmaprakash Jinan describes it as a means to develop the bhatini, the inner self, guiding the practitioner through mystical stages towards absorption in one's own inner selfhood.
Inner selfhood.
And the sources also reveal the integration of specific yogic concepts. Jinans refer to the heart and navel known as anahata and nabi chakras, respectively as vital energy centers. For a yogi, the ultimate goal is to reach the highest point of the Merudanda, often equated with the Sahasrara chakra, the crown chakra, achieving this sahaja state, a state of natural, spontaneous enlightenment, sometimes even described as bodily immortality.
Bodily immortality, wow.
Yeah. And the concentration of mind and breath on the shabda, the divine sound, through a practice called sarati shabda, is said to make the fear of life and death simply vanish.
This all sounds like incredibly intense spiritual work. How do these practices relate to the broader traditions of yoga and tantra? And how did the bhakti movements, which really emphasize devotion, view them? Was there overlap? Tension?
Well, the connection between Nath yogis and saints, these figures sometimes called new gunis like Kabir, that's a pretty well-established scholarly idea. It's often seen as a synthesis of Vaishnava bhakti, devotion, and these more esoteric, sometimes hidden tantric elements. Goraknath, the revered founder of the Nath Yogis, is believed to have reformed the Kawila Siva tantric movement, purifying it apparently of some radical sexual practices and establishing a celibate lineage.
So a kind of reform within Tantra itself.
Right. And while some tantric practices did involve what the texts call radically transgressive rites, like frequenting cremation grounds, the sources are pretty clear. These were for a small minority of advanced practitioners, not typical of mainstream Tantra. And this is where we see a fascinating shift in the spiritual landscape historically. The rise of Persianate state power, starting around the 13th century in North India, led to a decline in institutionalized tantric religion. It lost some of its public power.
Okay, political shifts having religious effects.
Exactly. And simultaneously, the expanding influence of Vedanta offered a more scripturally based orthodox identity, perhaps as a response to perceived threats, or maybe just a desire for broader appeal. Bhakti communities, especially in early modern North India, consciously distinguished themselves from these tantric yogic approaches. Part of their identity was actually formed by a consistent critique of Shaktas, who were often associated with blood sacrifice and sexual ritual in the popular imagination, rightly or wrongly.
So they were carving out their own space.
Precisely. So while Hindu rulers might privately support certain tantric cults, they very often publicly espoused Vaishnava Bhakti. It shows how traditions adapted not just spiritually, but also strategically, navigating these socio-political shifts.
That's a really important point about the strategic positioning of these movements. It wasn't just about pure theology. And what role did Sufism play in all this? Another major Islamic mystical tradition. How did it fit into this complex interplay?
Oh, Sufis were incredibly influential in India. They acted as these powerful conduits for mass conversions, partly because they were so skilled at reconciling Islamic traditions with local languages and customs, made it accessible. Sufi sheikhs, the masters, were revered as ideal Muslims, seen as authoritative channels of divine power even after death. Their lodges and tombs became really important pilgrimage centers for people of all religious backgrounds, not just Muslims.
Drawing everyone in.
Yeah. And the striking parallels you find in themes and symbols between Sufi devotional works and Indian Bhakti traditions. It strongly suggests Sufism played a really key role in shaping these spiritual sensibilities across the board. The Bhuj Niranjan, which is the specific jhanan, is a prime example of this kind of spiritual osmosis. Despite being an Ismaili jhanan, it surprisingly contains technical Sufi terms, Arabic and Persian origin, which are quite uncharacteristic for the generally vernacular jhanans.
Really? Sufi terms in an Ismaili text.
Yeah. This text, originally from the India Office Library collection, found its way into the Ismaili milieu in Punjab, reportedly kept secret by Gupti, or concealed, Ismailis, and was also known to some Sufi orders. It's just deeply permeated by Wadat al-Wujud, the Sufi concept of the unity of being.
Unity of being.
Right, the idea that reality is ultimately a single unified existence, which is God, a core Sufi concept, right there in an Ismaili jhanan.
This deep dive really reveals this constant flow, doesn't it? Ideas, influences, creating this intricate spiritual tapestry. Let's talk about some of the pivotal figures who guided these traditions. Shams is mentioned repeatedly in our sources. Who was he? Why is he such an important yet kind of complex figure?
Shams is truly fascinating, almost legendary, really, in the Jainan tradition. More Jainans bear his signature, his name, than almost any other author.
Yeah.
But scholarly attribution is highly doubtful for many of them.
What?
Just the sheer variety of styles. It suggests that later writers attributed works to him, a very common practice back then, to lend authority to a text. He's buried in Multan, in modern Pakistan, and he's often identified with Shams Tabriz, who was a mentor of the famous Sufi poet Rumi.
The Rumi connection, wow.
Yeah. It shows how these figures often transcended specific sectarian boundaries. His tomb is visited by many Sunnis even today, and some families trace their actual conversion to Islam back to him. There are even these traditional stories, these legends, of his powerful confrontations with other saints like Baba-ud-Din Zakaria, involving displays of mystical power, miracles, and such.
So his historical identity is really kind of blurred with these legendary feats and this cross-cultural significance. What about the broader concept then, the spiritual guide, the guru? Why was having a living guide so paramount in these traditions? What did that mean for practitioners on the ground?
The role of the Sadagar, the true guru, is absolutely central. You see it everywhere. In the Jainans, the Sadagar is depicted not just as a teacher, but as a living personification of all sacred sites. Yet, crucially, one who transcends fixed locations. They actively visit the devotee's home in the descriptions.
So not tied to a place, but to the person.
Exactly. It contrasts sharply with reliance on external pilgrimages or fixed shrines. For the listener, the key insight here, I think, is that the spiritual journey was often described as this intensely internal process, guided by an inner teacher or a chosen living teacher, not solely through external rituals or places.
Right, the inner journey guided externally.
Yeah, as one source puts it so powerfully, the guru is the boat that ferries across this ocean of fire. Many practitioners clearly felt that without a guru, I wouldn't get spiritual knowledge. It emphasizes that personalized living transmission of wisdom that a guru offered, helping you navigate these really complex philosophical ideas and practices.
So the emphasis is profoundly on that inner experience, but made accessible and guided by a revered active figure. What an incredible journey through the deep dive today. Seriously. We've truly seen how the Jainins emerged from this rich blend of Hindu and Islamic traditions, how fundamental concepts, divine reality, avatars, inner transformation, spiritual guidance, were constantly being reinterpreted, recontextualized across these different traditions.
Absolutely. And we've also seen just how fluid and adaptable these traditions were,
Yeah.
consistently absorbing and, importantly, reshaping influences from Bhakti, Tantra, Yoga, Sufism,
Hmm.
all of it. The stories of figures like Pir Shams, Syed Sultan, Kabir, they powerfully illustrate how these spiritual masters often became brilliant cultural engineers, didn't they? Bridging divides, forging entirely new paths of understanding and practice.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If religious and cultural identities are so profoundly fluid, constantly influenced and reformed by both external pressures and internal spiritual seeking, what does that mean for our modern understanding, our often quite fixed categories of faith or belonging? How much of what we consider pure or distinct is in fact this deeply interwoven tapestry of historical interactions and ultimately shared human seeking? This deep dive certainly suggests that maybe the truth lies less in rigid definitions and more in appreciating the fascinating